Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news, which is going to very quickly be changed, I think, straight down to being just called the podcast, video game news podcast. I don't want to put my name in it. I guess I could, certainly. But I almost would want to do video game news by Rydo instead of Rydo's podcast, as far as a gamer tag handle, pin name in it. Reason for that is YouTube is just pushing podcasts. I wouldn't be surprised if we find out that somebody big like Joe Rogan is going to end up back on YouTube, or perhaps Spotify's push forced YouTube into being more focused on podcasts, and it's taken them this entire time since Joe Rogan left YouTube for them to actually program a whole focus on podcast. It could also be certainly that the new guy in charge just is more into podcasts than the old guy in charge or old girl in charge. There's also this tryout duel rental competition event happening. So I'm not really ready for that, certainly. I'm not prepared. I haven't thought it through, but you know what? So in most cases, you're not prepared or thought things through, and this really is just going to be a push, I think, to finally call these live streams podcasts. It still, to me, doesn't really feel like a podcast in the sense it's just one person talking. It is going to inherently also be less focused on Yu-Gi-Oh! Or whatever card game is. I'll still probably play the card game, but I'm basically thinking that while playing the card game, that is mostly going to be a point of just a pre-show warm-up. And really what I should do is, if it were a little bit easier to do, is stop the recording and then start the recording over after playing a little bit of Yu-Gi-Oh! For like an hour and doing a warm-up and turning it into a proper video game news only show. But I'm not, again, prepared for any of that, so the first hour is just going to be kind of a warm up always, and we can open another 10 packs of this because we have quite a lot of these, and then we'll get into the video game news. Emphasis is going to definitely be at its absolute minimal as far as Yu-Gi-Oh! And so yeah, it's never really been a case where I've gone back to playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Once I've stopped anyways. But it's even more going to be the case that won't happen. And it's even more going to be the case that until Yu-Gi-Oh! Offers more rewards for playing against people, I'm not going to play against people. Aimed for a specific number of victories while playing with the specific event-specific rules. During the event, you can duel as many times as you like. The detailed rules available to use this time are loner decks containing Elemental, Hero, Stardust, and Utopia-related cards. Master the ins and outs of each of these decks to win rewards. You can save and replay duels from your match history. You can check your saved and replay duels. Why are they adding that? But then it also says, be aware that we could do this at any point to lighten the load. Yeah. Seems to me like there's quite the event here, but it's not being fully explained. So if anything, it's just like they're trying something a little bit different here, and making you play with loner decks instead of potentially crafting a deck and breaking their whole system. They're also giving you only 4 days to do it, but only asking for 3 wins, which is probably a little bit nicer, but it almost feels like whatever loner deck you played with now potentially could be locked out from you next week when they have part 2 of this happen. For the accountability section, I played a little bit of Prey, but honestly there's not a lot to say around it. But there is one thing, certainly, or 2 things really. At about approaching the midway point, or where I thought was the midway point of the game, I'm really questioning if I'm not even at the halfway point with the game, and that I've played it the entire game just incredibly slowly by searching everything when they kind of want you not to search as much. But that doesn't make any sense, because you really wouldn't be able to find enough resources to have enough bullets if you weren't searching for all the recyclable vendor trash throughout the game. So I really don't know. Like, I know I probably wasted about 2 hours going to an area that we weren't supposed to go to yet, but it does kind of feel like I'm just supposed to run through the entire space station a second time. Particularly since I got to the cargo bay, and in the cargo bay, all of a sudden, I find this collection of humans. You've not interacted with humans at all outside of phone calls for the vast majority of the game up until this point. There was like one prisoner that you could either kill or free at the very, near the beginning of the game. But that is pretty much it. Let's see. I'm gonna do this one. Trying to just figure out what the right move here is. It doesn't seem like this is much of an elemental hero card. Nothing else we can do. Alright. So yeah, in Prey, all of a sudden you get into the cargo bay and you meet up with, I would say, at least 7 characters. Now they're all just huddled down in one area and they don't have a lot to say, and they're just kind of walking around very simplistic NPC pathways, but it's something, certainly. And they have a whole mission there where you're surrounded by quite a lot of Titan characters that would have been really challenging if they didn't tell me to set up 3 turrets, and I had fortified the 3 turrets to be even stronger, and I had a fully powered up shotgun. And once we opened the door and let the enemies start to attack, they all basically lined up in a line, so one shotgun shot was killing all of them, or hitting all of them in a row. So what should have been a fairly big battle turned into a pretty pathetic 2-minute experience at most. Way more time spent setting up than actually fighting. Early in the game, I had found out that there were these smuggling caches in throughout the entire space station, and it didn't tell me originally where the smuggling caches looked like or anything. Eventually, a couple hours later, I got more information, which this really just highlights how storyline information is told to you in Prey, in the fact that you are just consistently being given a little bit of information about one thing, while in parallel there's 6 or 7 other narratives that are happening at the same time. Do we have anything we really want to banish? Okay. Let's do that. We will banish this card. He'll gain an ability. He'll gain 1,000 health. So when you get into the cargo bay, after having found all these people, you run into these security systems, which they had said some kind of security system on the wall was going to be the smuggler caches. And there's a couple different things on the walls that could have been it. There's these fire alarm type things with a big red bell on it that are high up. There are speakers on the walls, which are probably intercom systems and not security systems. And then there are small little things that are more eye light level that are almost certainly thermostats. And those are throughout the entire space station, the entire game, everywhere. All 3 of those are everywhere. The speakers, intercoms, and the fire alarms are way high up. So, and to open these secret smuggler vaults, you have to hit it 3 times with your wrench. Which, at this point, halfway through the game, there's no reason you'd ever use the wrench for anything. Unless you just made a specific build to still use the wrench, which maybe you should have. Because it would save you on bullets for sure. But I seriously doubt you'd run up to a Phantom or a Nightmare and just hit it with a super powerful wrench attack. So when you get into the cargo system, the cargo bay, there is a fire alarm system, but instead of being high up where you could barely reach it and would probably have to jump and climb to hit it, it is at eye level. It is also about twice as big as all the others, so it looks fairly obvious. It looks obviously different. And so I walked up to that and I hit it 3 times with my wrench, and it opened up, and there was a safe behind it. And that creates a weird situation where I now know that throughout the entire game, I have not seen a single instance of those smuggler caches otherwise. This is a weird tournament in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because, like, unless it's a case where it's 3 strikes and you're out, it seems like you could just keep on playing. Or unless it was a case where you have to get 3 wins in a row. Like, it doesn't seem like the stakes are very high. It seems like you'd eliminate only the laziest and worst of players, less than 1% of players, by having a requirement to just play get 3 victories. Now, you are still inherently taking up the player's time at the beginning of the month when they could be playing ranked otherwise, but I'm not. Let's see. So yeah, but that's pretty much all there is to Prey that I have to really say. The story is still a little awkward, really awkward, and it's delivered in a very bad way. The multiple parallel stories are awkward and delivered in a very bad way. And the idea that there would be humans just showing up, walking next to you this late into the game is weird. I've somehow accidentally already killed 2 humans. So getting the achievement for not killing any humans is already off the plate. Getting all the achievements for Prey is almost certainly not going to happen anyways, because of the Moon Crash DLC having achievements and just the necessity to play the game at least 3 times in a row. And I really do hope that whatever New Game Plus experience they really offer is much closer to a Resident Evil 4 New Game Plus than, oh, you can just play it again and your weapons are fully upgraded but you don't have any neuromods, or you don't have something else. Like, because the second time you play through it, you basically want to have infinite ammo as an option, and I don't know if the game really is going to do that and allow for that, but that would be exactly what I would want, is infinite ammo or the equivalent of that. I ran so short on ammo that I had to use recycling grenades in specific points in levels just to try to get enough resources. We have a neon white Neospatian. These all are just the hero characters from the second Yu-Gi-Oh series, after Yugi stopped doing his thing. Interesting. That's a new... It really is a point, and I'll just finish up talking about Prey by saying, yeah, it really does feel like it's a point where you would be better off having the story spoiled to you, in part because even the game itself is pretty early on teasing you as far as what the twist is at the end and what the ending is going to be, and having just a better understanding of strategy in the game would probably be a lot better. Or just looking at the achievements at the very least and spoiling yourself by seeing the achievements will give you a better experience. The other thing that happened, and this is not video game related, but heck, this quote unquote podcast, I guess is what it's going to be called, is also just an excuse for me to talk. I ran into a storm and my power flickered on and off quite a few times. And guess what happens to smart bulbs in the Tuya system when the power gets flickered on and off and on and off? They go into a unpaired reset mode and start blinking. So 22 bulbs, I believe was the final count, all had to be reconnected after that. Now, At some level, it wasn't as bad as it could be, because I could have had to have reconnected all of the bulbs and then relabeled all of the bulbs, which, like, when you have a like ceiling fan front, left, right, and back for 4 different bulbs, identifying each of those bulbs and relabeling them all at once would be an extra amount of effort, certainly. But what happens there is, even though the labels were kept, the association or whatever reference or device ID was changed and is different. So in the automations and in the scenes, I had to re-add all of the bulbs back into the programming and scripts, of which I had several. Now, I had given up on the idea of using groups to turn 4 bulbs for like a ceiling fan into a single group of 1, and I think now I've gone back and tried that again, because if I keep the groups, maybe that won't break the scenes, because the groups will still be okay as a reference from a reference. Also, it may just work a little bit better. It may not work as well, though, using groups. The truth is, in the whole setup phase, when I was trying to get everything to work, so many things were failing and running into problems that I'm uncertain what was working and what wasn't working. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm going to try groups to try to avoid that, because certainly it is annoying for even once a year that you would run into a storm and the power would flicker on and off so fast that it would mess up all the bulbs. Now, inherently, I could have saved a lot of those bulbs had I just flipped the light switches off, knowing that the storm is coming. That takes preparation, certainly. Flipping the light switches and just turning the power off would have saved most of those. But, yeah. So, yeah, that was a little bit of an annoying thing, and it also revealed that my router's setup, as far as having a dynamic DNS setting, which doesn't have anything to do with the smart home, really. It's just something I have for my WireGuard VPN, so that my cell phone connects to my router and sends all traffic through my router and encrypts it all. The dynamic DNS, either the DDWRT version I had kind of expired, or the settings were wrong. And so when the power went out, my IP address changed, because almost certainly because they're using a backup server, because my ISP's probably not working perfectly at the moment. So they gave me a new IP address, and the dynamic DNS should have automatically updated that new IP address to a www.com type address that then my WireGuard VPN would use to look up the correct IP address. And it just wasn't updating, and it was giving me trouble, so that gave me an excuse to update my router beta firmware, because they're all betas, to a newer version. And that gave me a little bit of trouble this early morning, but not that much trouble. As you can see, I did make it to actually stream today, and I could have certainly created a scenario where that wouldn't have happened, because I was just been muddling through getting my internet to work again. So, yeah. I'm not 100% sure where you could go, where you could move to avoid storms and weather. It does definitely seem like where I'm at is getting a little bit more hindered by weather, but that very well may just be mostly a perception issue. And almost certainly, I probably, as a kid, slept through a lot of storms and don't remember them. But yeah, so that created some extra work, but not a ton of extra work. Another issue I was having before the storm came in yesterday was I was trying to schedule YouTube Shorts and run my macro, and yeah, YouTube's studio was just crashing and the pages were not reloading and I couldn't update files or delete videos, so yeah, I had to just eventually give up because it just wasn't working, and hopefully that isn't a permanent problem, and that really would just be more of a case of I have no idea what these cards are. I don't think I've ever seen these. Some of these I definitely have seen, but more than likely this is just like second season of the second version of Yu-Gi-Oh! Second series, I guess is what you call it. Or it might even be from the third series. So yeah, it's not been a particularly productive few weeks. There is some hope that I'll have more free time, and in that free time there's hope that I'll actually accomplish, start to be more productive overall. Let's just see what this does. So negate the effects of that card, which that was pointless because he didn't have the right card effects anyways. This almost certainly is the blind leading the blind while playing this. It's just going to be people who mostly don't know these cards because they are either too new or too old. Let's see. Let's see. Like, none of these cards I thought I was sending a card to the graveyard, but I guess I misread the instructions there. Alright. Well, I can't attack. Alright. Video Games Chronicle has the first trailer for the post-Ash era Pokemon anime. I'm not going to show it because it wouldn't play anyways, but even if I could play it, there's definitely going to be a content ID claim if that happens. You can definitely see with this new Pokemon post-Ash era Pokemon series that you've got more modern starter Pokemon. You've got Pikachu with a hat, so I assume this isn't Ash's Pikachu at that point. That would seem a little weird, unless Ash and his Pikachu somehow split up. You've got a different looking Pokeball here and a standard Pokeball here. You've got a Ruby here that seems to be emphasized. And then you've got the girl and boy character trying to be in parallel here. The anime style is much more modernized, more colorful, probably making them a little bit more taller and long and drawn out, getting away from the kind of moe art style. And I guess you'd still probably put that in the kawaii cutesy art style, but it is definitely not truly really getting too close to what you would see in like a late night anime. It's still definitely trying to be very kid friendly, but also just better quality, probably using computer software instead of hand drawing. I wouldn't be surprised one bit if even the very last episode of the old Pokemon was 99.9% hand drawn, and this change in art style is to reflect a new audience, but also to reflect that they're going with more computerized experiences to make it easier to make. I'm not really expecting the quality of the Pokemon series to really go up. In fairness, I don't think the quality needs to go up any. Let's see. But yeah. I'm trying to see what is it about these pages that are not. You just have nothing here. You really can't play this deck unless you've got the Synchro Summon concept locked down well. See, I'm trying to figure out what would be stopping it. Yeah, I'll have to deal with it later. Yeah, I'll have to figure out why these aren't loading. Almost certainly it's because I'm blocking something, but I have multiple blockers, or Firefox has its own blocker kind of built in. It's been unnecessary to really research that up until this point, so I'll have to investigate that further. PAX East has its official mobile app for PAX East now available to download, which, yeah, it's probably not that useful to install these kinds of apps that would be temporary, specific to a single year's event. Very possibly is going to be tracking you. We may have finally gotten to a point where so we needed 3 things to Synchro Summon, or 2 things. That's giving me an 1800, which is not big enough. Oops, I was thinking the opposite was going to happen. Video game developer had this, GameDeveloper.com had this article I wanted to mention. Indie Troop's Sock Pop Collective on releasing 100 games in 5 years. Aaron Koning and Ruben Rubnaus, two members of the indie quartet Sock Pop Collective, share what they learned after releasing a century of games. Should you use the word century to describe 100 units of something, or only use it as a measurement of time as it normally would be used? I find it incredibly infuriating the game developer would give these people any time or any press, because this Sock Pop Collective, I know the name, has been flooding YouTube, Steam. I'm not so upset about people flooding YouTube, because the algorithm on YouTube is actually pretty good about hiding garbage content and not highlighting it, whereas Steam's doesn't really have an algorithm. Sock Pop Collective has been flooding Steam with garbage games for a long time. Like 2017 is when it says they started. And so over 5 years they've put out garbage game after garbage game. They are single concept things, often putting out 3 or 4 games in the same publish. And yeah, they just come off as trolls. Let's see. Here's some quotes here we can even get from this. I went back to a lot of games and I couldn't believe anybody liked them. We didn't explain the controls and the camera was jittery. These are the kind of issues I want to fix. Yeah, he won't. He'll make another 100 games. I think what helps now is that we have in the back of our minds the knowledge that we just have to make 100 games before we die. That helps me personally, because now I know I don't all have to be. It doesn't all have to be finished today. Yeah. It's really infuriating that Valve has never stepped in to really stop them and put any kind of limitations on the number of games that a indie direct person could list. The fact that they've released 100 games means they probably have spent, well, wouldn't that be $10,000? Giving $10,000 to Steam to probably not make that. Unless this is just a different Sock Pop Collective. I don't think it is. They said they only released 25. Which, even at 25, if that really is the number that came on Steam, it definitely caught my attention. And at 25 is too many. And now they're getting press, and so now almost certainly you'd assume more people would be encouraged to spam Steam with garbage games for a what I would say an illegitimate reason, which was a desire just to say we've released a bunch of games to pad out a resume or a portfolio. Let's try this other deck. Yeah. It definitely is something that that maybe if the press came now, maybe Valve would become aware all of a sudden that there was somebody. I wouldn't be surprised if it is mostly an automated process to list a game on Steam, with very few, if anybody, actually looking at it. And if there is really only one intern or lowest paid employee that is approving Steam Direct submissions, then they very possibly are so overwhelmed that they weren't realizing how many games were coming from Sock Pop Collective. Even though Sock Pop Collective did nothing to hide it. They all had the exact same loading screen on them and the same publisher. They in fairness to Sock Pop Collective, they weren't creating false identities and false businesses to money launder, like one assumes many Russian listings on Steam are. Just individuals coming by fake names to launder money. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that happen. I have no idea what these cards are. But yeah, society as a whole and the gaming community on Steam was not improved by Sock Pop Collective's input, in my opinion, at all. And there's always this weird situation where I'm in, where I don't want to push for censorship, but I know censorship is already happening as far as adult content on Steam. But I do want to push for quality control, or just reasonable limits. Like, at a certain point, yes, the speed limit on a road is taking away the ability to drive at any speed you want, but it is also beneficial to the safety of everyone else around you. A speed limit on the number of games that you could list on Steam is very reasonable. To say that if you're a Steam Direct person, you can put out exactly one game every 30-day period isn't crazy. And if you need, for some reason, to list more games than one per month, then you probably have to contact and pay a different agreement fee than just the $100 Steam Direct. $100 for Steam Direct things. Let's go ahead and discard this. I guess that kept him from being broken. Let's see. Tyrone Rodriguez, who is the executive producer of The Binding of Isaac and who I follow on Twitter, put out a picture of Edmund McMillan, who is the creator of Binding of Isaac and Super Meat Boy and The End Is Nigh, Legend of Bob-omb, Four Souls. Four Souls is a card game, I believe, and he's now working on Eugenics still. So they put out a birthday thing picture. I honestly couldn't tell you which one was which. I think this is Edmund McMillan, but I'm not sure. Is it really video game news to say a creator of a video game has a birthday like everybody else? No. Suppose it isn't, but I figured I'd mention it anyways. Let's see. I assume I'm supposed to do this and this. And then maybe this. And do this. And that doesn't do anything. Apparently, there is now an advanced mode under an analytics in YouTube Studio, according to YouTube creators. And here you can see from March 1st, accurate thumbnails with honest titles go a long way. Okay. I suppose YouTube creators probably should be pushing that idea. Let's see. GameDeveloper.com also had this article that is worth making sure we mention. Humble Bundle has launched a fund for earthquake relief in Turkey and Syria. Suppose if that is the way you want to support things, that is an option. The problem that inherently happens, and you can almost always throw out no matter what, is a country. A lot of emergency funds and donations get siphoned off, but some of it goes to good, so you just have to admit that no system is going to be perfect and there is going to be corruption. In Turkey in particular, there was accusations as far as corruption happening in the quality of the buildings being built and just like people cutting corners and inspectors not inspecting buildings, and that's why a lot of them allegedly fell down. There's allegations of somebody stealing a bunch of money, potentially the government in charge stealing a bunch of money or lying about an emergency fund happening. But you are in a weird position where you either support somebody or you don't, and if you don't, you're saying you don't care, and people are potentially going to suffer more. Now, is it the best way to... Is buying a Humble Bundle the best way to support Turkey and Syria? Not really. And I haven't even really heard any talk about Syria at all. Inherently, you also run into this problem where... Let's just click on this instead of that. Yeah. Most of the Humble Bundle things that are available, you probably already have or you don't want. So you pay at least $30, you get Gotham Knights, Ghost Runner, Pathfinder, Kingmaker Enhanced Edition, then several comic books, XCOM 2 Payday 2, Ticket to Ride. Most of these definitely seem like things you would have already owned or wouldn't want. I don't know what the situation is as far as getting Steam keys now. It does say 100% of this is donated to Turkey, Syria. They're spelling Turkey in its proper spelling, not the Anglicized English way. But it's going to Direct Relief, International Medical Corps, and Save the Children. There's a whole leaderboard system they're doing as far as who's donated the most. Which, yeah. Bunch of games. 72 games, definitely not a bad offering in this bundle. If you're getting all Steam codes, that would make a lot of sense. You could give custom amounts to the different charities. But yeah, I'm not sure you get any Steam codes on these anymore. That's the real question. I wouldn't be surprised if these are all good old games only. It says multiple platforms. So if I was to like click on this, redeemed on Steam, so you do have that option. Of course, like 10 volumes here, or this is just a book. Yeah. So that obviously wouldn't be redeemed on Steam. So you do get Steam codes. So yeah, not the worst donation. I don't know if I would bother to get back into doing humble bundles though. Almost certainly I don't own all these games, but it would be probably 9 or 10 of these games that I would get, and I probably do own several things. It would give you an interesting excuse to get less from Beyond, for instance. Some of these games I don't think have been on that much of a discount on Steam either. So actually, it's probably be a pretty good way to go about this. The numbers are getting bumped up a little bit by the Saga comic being available, volumes 1 through 10. I question if volume 10 of Saga is the last volume of Saga, though. Like, I suspect Saga is still being written. If it isn't still being written, I would suspect that it's not exactly 10 volumes long. But yeah, alright. So yeah, that looks like a decent Humble Bundle. I've not been paying much attention to Humble Bundles in the past year because, frankly, it was getting redundant and there was some small level of shadiness that I barely even remember now around Humble Bundle. But this is probably a great example of how you can just wait long enough and people will forget all of your old sins and just come back as a corporation. So it does seem like the only character that the only deck I can really play, because the only one that I even have a slight understanding of is the Heroes deck. So we'll just play that. We are, I guess, leaning more into cosplaying. That I'll highlight the occasional cosplayer if they're covering a video game character. Here you can see the Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite DLC, I think, that I never played. Or maybe I did play it and just ran through it so fast I didn't even remember. I think I may have actually played it and forgotten it. Elizabeth, as she's depicted, this Elizabeth is a very different character, and honestly, because it's the Elizabeth you only see in the DLC, it's not particularly that interesting of a character. Elizabeth, even in the main BioShock Infinite, was really just another one of those companions that you're carrying around with you throughout the entire game, or most of the game, and she was more annoying than anything else. I didn't feel anywhere as protective of Elizabeth as a young woman that I may have felt for a random little sister. If anything, I think that's probably the biggest failure throughout the entirety of the BioShock trilogy, is that there's an attempt there to make a deep, impactful relationship story between the main characters and either Elizabeth or this shouldn't work, but let's see what happens. Let's toss this one. Interesting. Didn't really help, though. Yeah, I do really think that, particularly in BioShock Infinite, Elizabeth should have been a much more important character, a much more likable character. That being said, BioShock, although it does have an interesting story, BioShock Infinite in particular, all those games are really more run and gunners that happen to do a great job of giving you a story as you're running and gunning. They aren't super focused on just the story to the point of being slow and plotting like a Telltale game might be. As for this cosplay, you have a lot of set dressing here, a lot of props, but the actual costume part of it isn't really that much. Like, it's lace stockings that you could buy off the shelf, a skirt that may have needed a little bit of modifications, and frankly, as a character, her outfit is just not that unique anyways, so it's obvious why this isn't much of a cosplay depiction as far as costume goes. The shirt may have been changed a little bit, the necklace may have been changed a little bit, but I would almost assume you spent nearly as much time getting the hair right and the makeup right than you did the entire rest of the outfit, and you almost certainly spent more time setting up the staging. Here we have another backside picture of the character. Now noticeably this isn't in any way really that lewd, it's it's not even really that provocative. And this is just shot in some kind of like manufacturing facility of some sort. It looks like major focus on the prop gun, and then you're just seeing the heels, which are probably store-bought off the shelf, the skirt and the back of the shirt, and there's just no designs or logos or anything to show there. So as far as the costume, aspect of cosplay, that's not really happening. You are embodying the character, and in a lot of ways that's a kind of great example of just what a lot of cosplay turns into, is that it is this cosplay turns into a short, minimal effort type experience for a lot of people, because they don't have a lot of budget, or they don't have a lot of skill, and they really do have actual care for the character and are just obsessed about the character. And in particular, when you look at like the kind of cosplay you tend to see highlighted at cost in Japan. Tokyo Game Show will be a great example of that, and I guess that's something we'll talk about when it happens more. The Japanese go all in, and they spend way too much time and energy and money on the cosplay, whereas a lot of the cosplay you see at like Comic Cons are very simplistic and ridiculous and kind of low effort. Those tend to get highlighted because there's just severely fewer cosplayers in the West and Western conventions than in Japan, where a garbage low effort cosplayer in Japan would probably never get any coverage or be laughed out of the building. Okay, let's try this again. I have no idea what I'm doing wrong here. Let's bring this guy with Monster Reborn. Finally we can summon something. Looks like we might be able to win here. But it definitely also feels like you're severely slowing down the gameplay by not knowing what you're doing. So I'm gonna risk showing my YouTube content page to show this off, so hopefully I don't highlight anything secure or important here, but you have to create the podcast now. Like, there's a whole podcast thing. You have videos, live, posts, playlists. You have to create a podcast, and you have to create a title, create a description, select a public visibility, and make a square picture thumbnail. Then once you create the podcast, you add existing videos to it. And I don't think retroactively at the moment I'll be adding the old videos to the podcast, but yeah, going forward, these live streams are going to be considered a podcast, and YouTube is just pushing me into that direction, which probably means that the algorithm is going to be in some way made so that it promotes podcasts. And from that direction, we'll have to start. Darn it. Well, I don't think I was gonna have won anyways, but yeah. Almost every podcast I listen to is definitely a more conversational style podcast between multiple people. To have a podcast where it's just one person talking, there's maybe a couple of podcasts I listen to where it's multiple people talking, reading out news, and taking turns, so I guess that's close to what I would be doing. But yeah, suffice it to say, there's more work to be done always. YouTube's changing everything, and wouldn't be surprised if YouTube all of a sudden monetizes podcasts differently and it pays a lot less. It's worth mentioning that, like YouTube Shorts, for instance, 10 million views on Shorts is, from what I hear, paying ridiculously small amounts of money. So for the people that would get 10 million views on a short are people that are potentially spending a lot more than the 1 minute of final footage worth of time to make that content. And so people are going to spend more and more time making more and more polished footage. But let's see. But yeah, so yeah, the podcast could easily all of a sudden be a lot of work for very little pay. But in my case, since I'm going to enter this begrudgingly and in a cautious manner, I probably still am much better off following it. And in all fairness, jumping into YouTube Shorts and learning something new has drastically improved my channel's number of subscribers. It's created something different from what I normally would want to make, certainly, and it's pushed me in a different direction, but I don't know if it's really pushed me in that bad of a direction, because what I have done is almost 100% automated with the podcast element. I wish that was a little bit more automated, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. Summon this. Activate this. Send 3 cards. 1. It's going to be ridiculous if I don't even get 3 wins here today, but we have been going for an hour, and honestly, it is probably worth it to just stop. So now we're at the Video Games Chronicle articles for today. Apparently the Xbox Series XS has sold 18.5 million versus the PlayStation 5 selling 30 million. An analyst firm estimates that Microsoft's share of the gaming market, combining hardware, content, and subscriptions, grew. It really is always shocking to me how far the Xbox is behind. And in realizing that, I really should, if I was going to buy any kids that deserved a new console, at this point I should get them a PlayStation 5 and drop and abandon any bias I would have had for the Xbox, just because I played the Xbox 360 many years ago. It would kind of suck, certainly, to lose all of the catalog of stuff. Although I'm also at a certain point where I still would push people in general to play Steam Deck and PC. I just don't think that there's... Oh, I didn't even know that could do that. Exactly the right amount of damage. Yeah. So, hopefully I can get like a quick victory with this duel trial, because since there really is only 4 days, I would be under the wire next Monday to get the remaining wins. And then, yeah, since I don't play over the weekends, that can also be a hassle. Okay. Set this. This is a defense character, so let's play that. Yeah, it's kind of hard for Sony to try and block the Activision Blizzard merger when Microsoft can point to these analysts and show that they actually are doing considerably worse, and that they're doing about half as much business as the PlayStation 5. In part, I wonder I kind of wonder why Microsoft didn't have these bits of information ready to go and show, and maybe they wanted to point out this information internally in meetings, and didn't want to have to publicly admit how badly they really are doing. In a lot of ways, Microsoft is definitely all over the place as far as Windows 11 and such, and so it does seem fairly leaderless, and feels like if Microsoft was broken up instead of allowed to merge into an Xbox and Microsoft, if they were split, then I could see Major Nelson focusing all of Xbox's division on just games, and then Windows could focus all of their efforts. The remaining part of Microsoft could focus their efforts on either the server side things they offer, or the Windows operating system, or Bing. All of those companies really should be separate companies. Which that's always been my thought too, is that in general, is if companies were just made in such a way that they couldn't merge and they couldn't grow and they couldn't go into other industries, and they just had to hit a saturation point where they had to admit that they have gotten as much market share as they possibly can get in the one industry they have to do business in, therefore they can only just maintain their business and pay out any profits to shareholders. It probably would be better to rich people who are shareholders and poor people in general, and just allow for more competition in general, because you wouldn't have companies like Amazon, for instance, who maxed out their share, their how much of the industry of book sales that could be controlled, and put every other bookstore basically out of business. You wouldn't have a company like Amazon then be able to move on to also selling groceries and other online things like electronics and TVs and clothing, and then moving into medical services and Prime Video. It's just ridiculous how many different industries Amazon has been allowed to become parts of duopolies or triopolies of, if not sole monopolies. And I specifically buy a lot of things from Amazon, so I am definitely part of the problem, but I can't really avoid it either. So we get a new rare card here and a new rare card here, and then kind of nothing. Not really that much of a reward. And it definitely doesn't seem like you can come back and do this again or get any more reward. So that is just that. And in all fairness, though, I do have to applaud them doing something like this and keeping it short and sweet. On the 6th, undoubtedly, we'll see Tryout Duel Rental Competition number 2 instead. And we may just see a different one of these every week for a month. Meanwhile, we really don't have any time to be playing ranked. We'll give it one game, and then that'll be it. Video Game Chronicle says Shigeru Miyamoto says he's confident Nintendo won't change after he leaves. Everything changes, obviously, but he means won't drastically change. And in all fairness, a Japanese company like Nintendo that's been around for over 100 years won't drastically change after he leaves, I'm sure. The March's Xbox Live games with gold titles have been confirmed. We already talked about that. Final Fantasy 16 producer would like to release a PC version eventually. IO Interactive is making an online fantasy RPG. Some of these are old articles, yeah, that I just forgot about. I still have yet to find the extra time necessary to try and change the programming on my macro to fix Video Games Chronicles. Inherently, I also want to change the number sign into a numero sign, but I realize that that's going to be difficult, to say the least, because there are definitely some things that still would need to use the number sign instead of the numero Unicode, and I'm not 100% sure that I can use the numero Unicode anyways, because the programming would be in JavaScript, and yeah, I just have no idea how I would do that. How you'd escape a Unicode character in JavaScript. But I do want to try that. But in general, I want to just finish Prey. That's the other thing I want to do. And Prey is grinding on. And one of the ways I definitely know that Prey is grinding on is that it has completely wiped my mind as far as remembering the games I played before it. It would be incredibly shocking if somehow Prey ended really well and then motivated me to play it multiple times. Just going through all this news. Alright, we should be at the new news now. Sifu has been dated for Xbox and Steam alongside a new Arenas expansion. The Kung Fu game is coming to more platforms and getting new content this month. Which, okay. Sifu feels like it's one of those games in particular that was talked a lot about on the Giant Bomb back when I was listening to the Giant Bomb cast. And I'm not sure that it really was that popular amongst actual mainstream video game, actual gamers, not as compared to video game journalists. So yeah. I'm not super hyped around Sifu. Probably have an argument to be somewhat super hyped around it, but well, these should work fairly well. You know what, come to think of this, I could have probably won this turn. No, I wouldn't have won. But I did have enough where I could have activated this and could have summoned our number 4 character. Just get rid of all the cards in his graveyard. Go ahead and summon Zeus here. In the turn. So yeah, I guess the Jeff Gerstmann podcast and Nextlander podcast, all the people who would have been on the Giant Bombcast a couple years ago, I bet they all start to have podcasts and things get labeled as podcasts. So as far as competition in the video game podcast, I bet there's going to be probably in a massive amount of competition there. Whereas other kinds of podcasts may be less frequent, less commonplace, or podcasts I don't listen to may not really show up here. It will be interesting to see the likes of the H3 podcast, for instance, with a lot of people really not liking that guy anymore. It'd be interesting to see if he somehow manages to rise to the ranks amongst podcasts just because he has momentum behind his channel. It'll be interesting to see how corporate entities try to have podcasts and try to get things on there. Like Good Mythical Morning, I imagine they will have 2 or 3 podcasts that will succeed fairly well. Most of the podcasts that I watch on YouTube are comedic podcasts, and being able to see the people interact is a big element to that, and react, because comedy can fall really flat just over the voice and the responses. Alright, now we'll just focus on news. So arguably an hour and 24 minutes in, at some point I would get some level of polish that would... What is that doing? Oh, I see what it's doing. At some level it would get a level of polish, and I would have a distinct break here, and everything up until this point would be considered a pre-show, which I wouldn't have wanted to talk about any news at that point at all, which that's the weird part that I'd have to figure out. Is it? And then the actual podcast show, I'd potentially do a whole new intro here at this point and try to like stop the recording and start the recording over, so it's a separate file. And that would be weird too, and hard to automate. Not super hard to automate, but it would take some thinking. Alright, so Video Games Chronicles. Telltale Games has delayed The Wolf Among Us 2 to 2024. They're saying it's in a bid to avoid crunch and deliver the sequel fans deserve. That is a great way of softening the blow. Inherently, we have to admit that the Telltale games that exist now is not the Telltale games of the past. We're lucky to even have the specter and possibility of having a Wolf Among Us 2. Inherently, if you enjoyed the Wolf Among Us Telltale game, you should just read the comic book it's based off of, which I don't think is just called The Wolf Among Us. I think it's called something else. Of course, this sets an interesting precedent in which anytime any game is delayed, you can say it's to avoid crunch and be at least on some level truthful at that. And deliver the sequel the fans deserve is a great way of saying the quality was not up to snuff. I wouldn't be surprised if this game somehow magically never comes out, though. It very well could just be that the Telltale games that exist now doesn't really have the right kind of programmers and the right kind of team to make a finished product, or they don't have the writers, or anything, something like that. Moving on, EU regulator has extended the deadline for its decision on the Microsoft Activision merger. The antitrust boss says global regulators cannot be in a race to rule on mega deals. I would assume is what they mean there, not of mega deals. I wouldn't be surprised if this is really just a case where the European Commission, the UK Commission, and the US Commissions, or whatever each of those governing bodies would be actually called. I wonder if they're potentially each stalling to try to milk as many compromises and promises out of Microsoft, or as many bribes out of Microsoft to individual members of those boards. On the other hand, it is generally a good idea when government is slow and people take their time and do the full research. Particularly, you see this in court cases. It does not feel like justice is usually served if you're having a drumhead trial and someone is convicted of treason and executed in 5 minutes, compared to a long trial that shows all the evidence for all the public to see, for the jury to see, to get every single detail and make sure every single shadow of a doubt is eliminated. And particularly in the United States, a lot of laws that are passed by Congress are like single sentences, 2 sentences for a section of the law, and those sentences add up to potentially really big laws. But most of the time, the intent is not clearly spelled out enough by congressional laws, and then you end up with people challenging what the intent was in those congressional laws, and then you have to have court cases and precedent and even more paperwork just to prove what was intended before. So if Congress took a little bit more time to directly speak and spell out what they mean to say, it would be better, certainly. Computer code, compared to the way people normally talk, is a great contrast. In computer code, when you're programming a computer, you have to tell the computer exactly what you mean in the way that a computer will absolutely understand what you mean. You can't have typos, you can't have mistakes, you can't be good enough or expect the computer to get the gist of it. You have to clearly spell out what you want it to do. law should be like that. Regulatory law or any other kind of law. In the end, though, I feel like I still have to just double down on I imagine the Microsoft Activision merger will happen. Moving on, Star Wars Jedi Survivor's director has his sights set on a trilogy. Stig Asmussen says a third game in the series would most likely be made with Unreal Engine 5. Is the current game made in Unreal Engine 4? Yeah. Moving from Unreal Engine 4 to 5 is not that difficult, really. It would be nice to definitely have a Star Wars trilogy of games that potentially can stand the test of time, because of the fairly large amount of Star Wars games that have been made, Battlefront is not something you can really go back and play because it's multiplayer, and so that mostly means if you wanted to play a Star Wars game that's good, you're talking Force Unleashed, which is really not canon, and I don't think Force Unleashed 2 is as good as Force Unleashed 1, or you're getting back all the way to Knights of the Old Republic. There is that other Star Wars game they teased, and I haven't heard anything more from that as far as it. They only had that teaser trailer. We'll probably do for some more teasing or announcement around that. I guess Star Wars also is in that weird situation where there's potentially too many games with Star Wars in the name. So they have to be fairly careful not to flood the market with too much Star Wars content. Although I'd say Disney at the moment is not doing a great job with that. They're probably in a holding pattern at the moment, trying to figure out what they want to do with the Mandalorian TV series and the next trilogy of Star Wars movies. And if they took 2 or 3 years to plan that all out, plan out the next 10 years of Star Wars in the next 3 years, then that would probably be a better outcome than the the sequels, I guess is what they would be called, trilogy of episode 7, 8, and 9. Video Games Chronicles is talking about the game. You do run into some problems here where, like, Gotham Knights may be giving you just the base of the game, so it might be somewhat worthwhile to figure out really if you are going to if you're going to need to buy DLC for some of these games, particularly like Gotham Knights, where, like, I don't really even want to play Gotham Knights, let alone pay for DLC, just because I want to own all the DLC for every game I own on Steam, which is kind of a crazy thought, but not that crazy of a thought. Let's see. The FTC has told PlayStation it has to reveal its third-party exclusivity deals. Sony's request to quash a motion Microsoft subpoena has been mostly rejected. So the way I understand subpoenas go, and it's kind of crazy, is that at the beginning of the stage, Microsoft is literally capable, Microsoft's lawyers, they're literally capable of sending subpoenas to anybody, even Sony, for information that might be relevant to the case. And in this case, this would be the Activision Blizzard merger case. And Sony doesn't want to reveal third-party exclusivity deals, obviously. So then they had to go to the judge and say, we're asking you to quash this subpoena and not force us to reveal that. Now the judge has said, no, you actually do have to reveal it. He very possibly is going to keep it marked confidential so it won't become part of the public record. But Sony is going to have to reveal that information to the court, because the court has the ultimate authority and needs that ultimate authority to gather relevant information to make its decisions, even if that relevant information is coming from a interested party but a non-named party like Sony in this lawsuit, because this isn't Sony suing Microsoft or something like that. This is the United States government suing Microsoft to stop a merger. So yeah, that's the right outcome in my opinion. Certainly is that the court needs all the information it possibly can to make the best decision it can possibly make for the people and society in general, whether protecting the interest of a corporation which is a part of society to some extent, like Microsoft, or the United States government representing the people of the United States in the FTC. Let's see. Now, I did say relevant information multiple times there, because Sony, if Microsoft had subpoenaed Sony for completely irrelevant information that has nothing to do potentially with the Activision Blizzard merger and the state of the industry and the state of the market and the topic that has been brought up by Sony themselves as far as exclusivity, then the judge would have quashed it. If, for instance, Microsoft had subpoenaed for the HR records of all the employees at Sony, that would have not happened unless they made a really good argument for it, or if they had subpoenaed the private home phone number of the CEO of Sony, that probably would have been squashed or quashed as being irrelevant. Moving on, images show a new Nintendo Switch bundle with a choice of Mario game and movie stickers. Update here, Nintendo of America has officially announced the Switch Mario Choose One bundle. So, you have the option to download one of 3 Mario games: Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, which is not a good game. In my opinion, it doesn't run particularly well. Or Super Mario Odyssey, which, if you have people to play with, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe will get you more entertainment in the long run. Super Mario Odyssey is the better option. Don't pick New Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. What's interesting here too is it's download 1 and download in particular. And it's Super Mario Bros. Movie stickers, not Super Mario Bros. Movie tickets, which you would have thought it might be tickets. In a lot of ways, this is just them Nintendo not being willing to reduce the price of the Nintendo Switch. Noticeably, this is not the OLED model. This is just the standard Nintendo console with red Joy-Con controllers. And there's, I don't think, ever been any kind of official confirmation that they've made better Joy-Cons that would drift even a little bit less. So, yeah. If you're extremely late to the party, even later than I was, and don't have a Switch, this is probably the Switch to buy. But otherwise, I would severely wait to buy a second Switch in favor of a Steam Deck, or just saving your money for more games, or a Switch 2, which eventually they're going to have to announce something as far as a sequel to the Nintendo Switch. Moving on, UK regulators met with Microsoft and Activision to discuss merger remedies. This is the UK, not the EU. Microsoft has reportedly said it's willing to pay a third-party agency to oversee its compliance. This is the CMA, Competition and Markets Authority in the UK, not to be confused with the CWA, Communication Workers of America, in the United States, which are actively trying to unionize Activision Blizzard, but aren't against the merger happening. If anything, I think CWA would be happy to unionize Activision Blizzard and then have a union inside of Microsoft that they could then seek to expand to other subsidiaries of Microsoft. Balin Wonderworld creator, and I believe he was somewhat involved with Sonic, Yuji Naka, has admitted guilt in the Square Enix insider trading case. The developer says he made around $145,000 selling stock. Now, either it's a coincidence or it isn't. Tinfoil hat, it isn't. Giving the best benefit of the doubt, it is. Square Enix has just replaced their president of Square Enix, and we'll get to that story later. There was about 3 people who were charged for insider trading, basically knowing insider information about Square Enix and buying up shares before that information was made public. Naka was arrested twice and now has admitted guilt. It is pretty common in the Japanese legal system, which is arguably not a very fair legal system. Most Asian legal systems aren't fair or in any way, I think, even that accurate. But speaking specifically to the Japanese legal system, it's pretty much impossible to get a not guilty conviction or get a not guilty outcome once you've been charged with something. The lawyers will straight up just tell you that it's too difficult and that it's just pretty impossible, and you should just plead, bargain down to a guilty claim. So the fact that it is so hard for there to be a not guilty outcome in the Japanese judicial system puts the entirety of the Japanese judicial system in question in my mind, and I think most foreigners' minds, and honestly I wouldn't be surprised if even the Japanese kind of know that too. Inherently, it's not too different from the United States system, though, at a certain point, because as soon as a police officer puts your name in some database in the United States, once you're in the system, your life just inherently gets worse and worse and worse, and it becomes incredibly difficult to recover from that, even if you're found not guilty in the long run. So you wonder why so many people run for the cops in the United States. It kind of makes sense. Like, just being booked, just spending 24 hours being arrested is enough for you to lose your job. It's enough for you to have a court date. If you can't get to that court date, it's enough for you to have a bench warrant. It's enough for you to potentially have to pay bail or bond. And then you're being put into a system that is not 100% accurate, that will convict people on the flimsiest bit of evidence or force you to plea bargain and claim guilt when you are innocent or you feel you're innocent. There's so many laws, particularly in the United States, speaking of the United States, where almost every citizen is guilty of breaking some jaywalking law or something, even if they're unaware of it in the United States. So they can always convict you of something, some lesser charge. And it's even worse in Japan because there's not even a jury of your peers system. In Japan, it's just 3 judges who are more than happy to throw the book at you for wasting their time and daring to not just admit guilt at the beginning. I do think Yuji Naka is guilty, but it is a shame that the Japanese system, as I understand it, is the way it is. The vast majority of Japanese people never interact with their police or their judicial system, so there's not really a lot of interest in improving the fairness of that system in the first place. If anything, it's mostly foreigners that are going to get railroaded. It is strange that you'd even have insider trading be a thing here, but whatever. The Japanese do break the law as much as Americans do, in my opinion, because it's technically illegal to gamble. It's technically, I think, illegal for them to look at uncensored porn on the internet from other websites. It's probably other things that they do all the time that are just tiny things that really shouldn't be illegal but are illegal. But I don't think there's really anything more to say here. So, yeah. This guy's probably guilty. I wish the Japanese system was better. If the Japanese can make their judicial system better, then maybe they could come over to America and make the American system better. Inherently, I wonder if it isn't better for countries to straight up just toss their laws out and replace them with new laws every 10 or 20 years. If there was a limited term like contracts of even 100 years for laws, it would get rid of a bunch of old laws that don't need to be in existence anymore or weren't written well in the first place. Make Congress, make states pass new, easier to understand, modernized takes on laws. Otherwise, just make the laws legal. More things being legal would be better for most citizens. Moving on, the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Wave 4 release date and track list has been confirmed. The game's next DLC pack launches next week on March 9th. And here's a list of tracks if you're interested at Video Games Chronicles. And see, this is weird because I swear we had already covered this story, but I know we haven't covered any of those previous stories. So maybe it's just new for BAFTA and I'm thinking of a different award show. God of War Ragnarok is BAFTA's most nominated game ever. BAFTA reveals the nomination for its 2023 awards, including 14 for God of War Ragnarok. This is, I guess, the BAFTA award. I've seen BAFTA awards before. There must be different BAFTAs or different awards each year, because they didn't look like that. Are we going to get a list of nominations? Yes. See if there's anything here really too interesting to mention. This looks all pretty commonplace. I saw someone cover this game, Immortality. It's like a live action game that it has a lot to do with like sex scenes and porn in the movie industry, and then there's even more weirdness on top of that that I don't want to spoil, but yeah, Immortality is oddly an avant-garde art piece more than a video game, and probably deserves to win an award for artistic achievement, whereas if you gave it to just like Elden Ring or Plague Tale Requiem, you're getting a very simplistic, normal story for video games, which artistic achievements in video games are pretty high, overall for good games, but I think Immortality really goes in a very different direction and deserves to be awarded for that. It's questionable, though, certainly, that like Marvel Snap might win Best Game over Elden Ring or God of War Ragnarok. That almost certainly wouldn't happen. And if like Vampire Survivors won, it would really just point to them giving the award to the most popular game at the moment. They have a category specifically for British games, and in that there's only 3 or 4 of these that I recognize, and the other couple of them are very small games. Debut game is an interesting category because that, I guess, means that this is the first game from that development group, which probably doesn't really mean that much. Inherently, you could make one game as a group of people and then change your name of your development company and then have another debut game. Like Steven Spielberg can have a Spielberg Productions, but inherently Steven Spielberg's debut movie is going to be the first movie he made, whether that was American Graffiti or something else. I'm not sure. Like, evolving game is an interesting category, and then a family category just seems specifically kind of out of nowhere. Gives them an excuse to give some awards potentially, or at least nominations, to Nintendo. I'm not sure if Nintendo's gonna really be particularly happy about getting British awards any more than they would care about getting United States awards. They might be happier though. Game Beyond Entertainment has some games I don't recognize. Some I do. These are more games with a message. You know, the thing I'll say about this nomination is that they at least have gone out of their way to pick a good variety of games instead of just giving everything to like Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, or Elden Ring, or Ragnarok. Because I could see a lazier effort here where you'd have categories with just those 3 games. I believe this is probably the first year that BAFTA has given out awards for video games. If not this year, then the last year was the first time. Original property is an interesting category. And then performer in a leading role, performer in a supporting role, technical achievement. I'm not sure what that really would mean in video games. And then the EE Game of the Year, voted for by the public. What does the EE stand for? Yeah. It's a nice selection of nominations. Though most award shows not that diverse. Video Games Chronicle has a video of new Resident Evil 4 remake footage showing the Ashley stages and the Krauser knife fights. Let's see. I don't want to spend the time to watch it anyways. I've gotten into this mode in my mind at this point where I really don't want to see anything more around Resident Evil 4 unless they're going to show something totally new and reveal that there's new content, which would be weird, or a new gameplay mode or something like that. They actually put out a update to Resident Evil 4 on Steam that fixes some of the animations at 60 frames per second, which is just weird to even see an update show up at all. I've noticed that a lot of things have been updated somewhat recently, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's some library that had a vulnerability that a lot of games and apps we're using anyways. Things get updated generally pretty quick, pretty often, but video games, particularly old video games, don't get updated that often. And the Google apps I have installed on my phone get updated way more than the games I have installed on my computer, although I don't have that many games installed on my computer in comparison. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says the EU is reportedly unlikely to demand asset sale in the Microsoft Activision merger. Sources claim the offer of licensing deals to rival is expected to address antitrust concerns. It would be perhaps an interesting twist to be thrown out there if Microsoft was forced to sell the Call of Duty Activision licenses to some kind of spin-off company or holding company otherwise. It probably wouldn't even matter that much though. If Call of Duty was not owned by name, but Microsoft could get the employees that worked on Call of Duty, then they could just make a new game by a new name and say from the creators of Call of Duty. Or if it had to be a case where Activision Call of Duty titles and the employees who worked on those games had to be sold off to a holding company, I don't think Microsoft would really even care about that anyways. I still feel like it's mostly a red herring to be focused on Call of Duty. It would be impossible for the merger to go through and really mean anything though if they had to sell off all the Activision and Blizzard titles. If there literally was no game at all that they were acquiring in the acquisition, I don't see why Microsoft would go through with the merger acquisition. I don't know why they're even calling it a merger. It's not a merger of equals by any means. Microsoft is not going to become Microsoft Activision Blizzard. And that's definitely not going to happen. Yeah, I don't think Microsoft wants the employees, a lot of the employees. They probably want some of them, but they want the games. They want the technology and the code. Moving on, the Epic Games Store's next free title has been announced. Call of the Sea will replace Rise of Industry, which is currently free to claim. I don't recognize Call of the Sea. It looks a little interesting as a game. Well, this is an interesting twist. I guess we are just going to get articles from Video Game Chronicles promoting their podcast. And Video Game Chronicle podcast says Sleeping with Pokemon and with Jeff Gerstmann. So Jeff Gerstmann immediately showing up on the Video Game Chronicles podcast. I bet he's not going to become a permanent addition, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did. What is more interesting to show off here, as the guy who was supposedly in charge of Giant Bomb, he really has failed to make an interesting YouTube channel podcast by himself or make any friends and bring in that many people or get any press. And even here, if you look in the background of his image, which, yeah, look at what you're doing. I know he's taking care of a baby. I know he's in a tiny house or apartment, but he's got just baby stuff all over the floor, and the camera is focusing on that. In all fairness, the camera really should just be either fish-eyed somewhat to his head or zoomed in severely to his head. Anyways, nobody needs to see his t-shirt that much or his arms. Like, you could easily have framed this out to that resolution, or just clean up your background and set up a background in the first place. Even like ignoring the mess, this TV and the walls and this image is all just not an attractive background. Look in comparison here, you have a nice little bookshelf, an old retro tube TV, a display case that is lit up. You have what looks like probably just blinds, although that might be LEDs behind the blinds. In the middle of the blinds, he's got a object of interest. He's got a nice little side table here. This might be a bed here, but it's well made. The coloring and lighting and just balancing is way better where his picture, and this is their screenshot they made, so this is like the best picture they could get. It's totally blown out and too bright in this corner. It's too dark in these corners. You potentially could pick up a reflection here showing something you don't want to. Then you look at this guy at the bottom here, and he's just blowing these two out of the water as far as it's seen. You've got a whole back wall here of dimly colored lit displays, different colored displays over here. You've got a light over here that maybe is a little too bright. Maybe it's a little too dark on one side and a little too bright on this side, but he's got this nice angled perspective instead of face on, which fixes the problem of a microphone just being right in the middle of the shot, at least. The microphone is framed way better. His head's bigger than these characters, where the camera is likely on top of a monitor and not zoomed in. He's got a whole camera on the side. I wouldn't be surprised if this guy has another shot we can show it on the other side. Yeah. Of course, the bigger thing to mention here, as I'm rambling about what not to do and just pointing out how ridiculous it is that Jeff Grossman, who's been in the industry this whole time, is just not trying or failing miserably to do basic things, is, do I care what any of these people have to say? And the answer to that is a resounding no. I should care what Jeff Grossman has to say, but he's not had anything to say on the Bombcast for the many years, the last few years that he was on it. So, yeah, I don't care now that he doesn't work for Giant Bomb. And Giant Bomb is now run by a whole bunch of people that weren't there originally, or the second or third generation of people that weren't there originally. Moving on back to video game news though, 14 minutes of the new Dead Island 2 gameplay have been released. This is an interesting looking new guy, as far as a crazy zombie character. That being said, I kind of am in the same position with Dead Island 2 as I am with Resident Evil 4, in that I've seen enough. I'm just waiting for the game to come out, and we'll see the reviews at that point. And then 6 months to 2 years later, I'll cut around to playing it, maybe. Metroid Fusion has joined the Switch Online's Game Boy Advance library next week. The addition will mean the entire mainline 2D Metroid saga is available on the Switch, which that's an easy decision to make, certainly, because then that lets you move forward to Metroid Prime 4 being announced or delayed. And either way, just make an announcement of a delay or make an announcement of a release date. There's nothing holding it back now as far as Metroid Prime Remaster, unless they're working on a Metroid Prime 2 Remaster or Metroid Prime 3 Remaster. Noticeably also, they are focusing in on the Kirby games and even F-Zero Maximum Velocity in Golden Sun. So they're trying to bring over anything that they can easily bring over and don't have to license again, as far as these Game Boy game options. Capcom has confirmed its next digital event is going to be next week, Spotlight will feature news on Resident Evil 4, Mega Man Battle Network Legacy Collection, and more. This feels like this is in time with the Tokyo Game Show. Which, okay. We'll see what they have to say. And here's that story I was talking about. Square Enix is replacing the president, Yosuke Matsuda. Pending approval, the company wants to keep focusing on, quote, adopting ever-evolving technological innovations. I heard the claim was that it was to focus on more creativity and creative descriptions. That was the headline I had seen. But I don't really see a quote here. Here they're talking about here's a quote here. Blockchain has been an object of exhilaration and a source of turmoil, but with that in the rearview mirror, we hope that blockchain games will transition to a new stage of growth in 2023. So, he was pushing blockchains. They're now trying to push him out. Now, tinfoil hat theory. He did something like insider trading too and hasn't been caught yet. Or they just want to get rid of him because he's been the guy, the figurehead in charge at least, if not the actual person in charge, that has just run Square Enix into the ground and made terrible business decisions over and over again. Most recently, the Forspoken team being merged back into Square Enix and effectively shut down as an independent entity that would actually potentially make another game, and then certainly selling off its Tomb Raider franchise, which Video Games Chronicles really needs to just paint an X through here because they don't have Tomb Raider anymore. And so yeah, there's less and less they can really focus on. It does paint a picture as far as just does this potentially change the odds of getting another Nier game? Because we probably could do with another Nier game. Or will we get better remasters of old Final Fantasy games now instead of the bad remasters we've been given? Or better development of new Final Fantasy games? Yeah, a lot of things could change, but I wouldn't be surprised if everything mostly stays the same. I said it a few weeks ago. Typically, when a Japanese president leaves, the person that replaces them feels the Japanese need to respect the wishes of the previous president and honor his decisions, and mostly just do exactly the same thing. Apparently there was a security reason, so yeah, maybe that is in part of the updates that I've been seeing. But they've taken off the Wii U games for Mario Kart 8 and Splatoon offline for security reasons. Games are down for extended maintenance, and it's not clear when they'll be online again. I assume they will be online again. This is an interesting picture they found around that. And then the Switch's Sega Mega Drive controller is back in stock in the UK. And that's the last of the Video Game Chronicles articles. For the Gamatsu articles now, Atari Mania is coming to the PS5 and PS4 on April 4th. The romance visual novel Hokago Cinderella 2 is coming to the PS4 Switch on June 29th in Japan. Now, I think would be a good time to pause the recording. I'm not even going to pause the recording. I'm just going to run to the bathroom real fast and take a quick break, and I'll be back in like 2 minutes. Be right back. Okay, I'm back. So that would be a great example, particularly as far as just improving. And if I had a podcast partner where I could throw over to the other person for them to talk about the news for a brief time. Although inherently I do want all the news in my brain, so somebody would have to catch me up after the presentation. But yeah, that's why you always see two presenters in news situations, because it's so if somebody has to run to the bathroom, somebody is choking, coughing, needs to drink water, they throw over the news story to the other person. Or more often than not, they don't even throw over the next news story, they just skip over to the next news story the next person was already prepared to talk about, and then they come back to the list of the other person when they're available. So they just divide the load that way. Now inherently, for myself, with the weird schedule I have and the lack of consistent timings at which these streams happen, I would need potentially somebody on Discord that I could share screens with or something. And it would require a whole new level of thinking about collaboration, and it would need somebody that just has a ridiculous amount of free time and weird schedule themselves, that they would just be available at the drop of a hat to be the second chair or even the first chair of a podcast or a presentation like this. Moving on, Gamatsu says the romance visual novel Hatsuyuki Sakura is coming to Switch on June 29th in Japan. This feels like this is yet another moe visual novel. Yeah. And you can see, I wish I had the Pokemon anime picture to compare. I think I actually do. Yeah. Like, you can see the difference in style here, where it's longer necks, more stretched out, a little bit skinnier than here, where necks are a little bit shorter, a little bit shorter limbs. And this isn't even really that moe, and when you actually, even this picture draws the character longer but still not quite in the same style. This feels like anime cartoon for kids, whereas this is teenagers slash adult romance visual novel. Animation style, more anime style that you would typically expect, or adult late night anime style. Mostly just anime style in general. Yeah, this really isn't anime style. This is something different. Something probably fairly unique to Pokemon. A survivor-like auto shooter, Deep Rock Galactic Survivor, has been Deep Rock Galactic Survivor has been announced for PC. Which, okay. So now are we just constantly going to have Vampire Survivor clones? And they're just going to be called Survivors Likes? I guess we are. Alright, well. I guess we'll leave it at that. Fitness Circuit for the Switch is coming to the West on May 26th. You'd almost call this like a comic book style with the pixelation and the diffusion and dithering here, but it probably would be better described as a billboard or advertisement style if you were to try to make a style name for this. It's minimalism in human form. It's an interesting pose, certainly. They put a lot of thought in the silhouette of this, in the angle, and then filled in minimal detail overall, and it makes it stand out. As for what the actual game is, looks like it's a collection of fitness mini games. Noticeably, it seems like you can build your character in this is a more traditional animation style compared to the cover. So the cover is probably just a standout art piece. Let's see, a social sandbox MMO called Pax Dea. I assume that's how you would pronounce that, or probably Pax Die, has been announced for PC. Playtest signups are now available. Let's see what this looks like. Looks like a fantasy game. Sounds like a medieval fantasy game. Not sure there's too much that they have to show at the moment. It looks pretty as far as an announcement trailer. Well, it would be interesting to see what that really turns into. I guess the biggest question to ask around this is there something like this game? Could this ever be made so at such a level of quality that it would replace Elder Scrolls Online, which Microsoft already owns, or World of Warcraft, which Microsoft is potentially going to own? Yeah, and at a certain level, I just don't know if MMO as a concept ever should have succeeded in the first place, and it is just a correction that MMOs these days are not that popular because there's just not a single game in which everybody would play. If I was going to play an MMO at the moment, I'd almost certainly play World of Warcraft and try to see what that is like, even though I've never played it before. Moving on, Sifu for the Xbox Series, Xbox One, and Steam launches March 28th alongside an Arenas update. Which, okay. It's basically the exact same thing I said first time we saw this in article. Wolf Among Us 2, a Telltale series, has been delayed out of 2023. It's due out now when it's ready. I thought they were saying they delayed it to later 2023, but I guess not. A game called Melon Journey, Bittersweet Memories, has been delayed to April 6th, no longer March 7th. That's basically a month delay. This is an interesting claymation style. There's only been a few claymation games that were ever made, and basically Clay Fighter and a few others. And looking at this trailer, it doesn't look like they actually use claymation animation. This is literally just a soundtrack video showing the same animations over and over again. Yeah. So if the game really was done in claymation, I'd be somewhat interested in that, but I also wouldn't be surprised if it isn't. Honestly, if anybody was going to make a claymation style game, it'd probably be Nintendo, in the same vein as like Yoshi's Woolly World. Kuro no Kisekai Legend of Heroes for PC is now available in Japanese with new features by PH3, featuring higher frame rate, enhanced autosave, Steam Deck optimizations, and more. PH3, I assume, is the porter of this game. They ported it to PC. Honestly, I would be very happy to see a lot of Japanese RPGs be ported to Steam, or specifically being updated on Steam to have enhanced autosaves or Steam Deck optimizations, or just in general faster experiences in general. I saw a review of like Final Fantasy 13, they were talking about like disappointing games, and they were talking about how, and this is not something I'd ever heard before, and I assume it's true. For the first 3 or 4 hours in Final Fantasy 13, you don't get any resources to level up, and it is a fairly auto combat heavy experience, which the person reviewing, talking about the game, did not like. Which, yeah, I probably should do more research before I ever got anywhere close to reviewing or playing a Final Fantasy game, just to make sure I wouldn't lock myself into 600 hours of grind, which that is definitely the risk, is that you would lock yourself into a ton of grind, which I've done that in other games. Even Prey at the moment is very much feeling like one of those games where it could be very grindy. Let's see. Yi's Memory, Oath of Felgahana, is coming to Asia on May 25th in traditional Chinese and Korean. I'm not sure if it is in English anywhere. Really wouldn't make a lot of sense for it to be in English before coming out in Chinese. The Yi series is another series to potentially consider playing if I was going to play a bunch of JRPGs. But in all fairness, I did try to play Ni no Kuni as a Japanese RPG, and that went particularly badly, so... Well, it does say it's in English as far as the prologue, so there might very well be an English version of these memories. Something that's already out and available. Let's see. Seems like if there was an English translation of this game before, it would make a lot of sense to release it in English again, but maybe there's something that they don't want to get yelled at for in the game, like killing kids or nudity or violence. Moving on, Subway Midnight is coming to the Switch on March 16th, a horror adventure game currently available on PC. Let's see what it looks like on Steam. It's on my wish list. It is a weird looking game. I think it's potentially part of the Benny series. This is probably the kind of game that you would want to play if I had enough time to make multiple games or cover multiple games in October. Which honestly I don't even know if I'm going to stick with the idea of having a Halloween month and covering horror games specifically in October or not. In a lot of ways, I Prey, which I'm playing now, should be my October series, and it's not even that scary. Moving on, Komatsu says Uncharted Waters Origins launches March 7th worldwide for PC and smartphones. Looks like it's a pirate game. Looks like it's nice in its cinematic trailer, but I don't know for a second if that's really what this game is. Yeah, I've never really seen a successful pirate game or sailing game being made. Yeah. It's a turn-based RPG, strategy RPG. Is really what it is. So it looks nothing. It's nothing like what that trailer looks like. Reality is it looks like this, which is a completely different game. Yeah. Do not be tricked by cinematic trailers with fancy animation. The game The Last Worker launches March 30th. Subtitled Don't Be a Robot. Which, okay. We'll leave it at that. We don't need to watch every trailer. Fuga Melodies of Steel 2 details Chapter 1 story, more characters, and battle mechanics. Yep. I assume this game is getting a sequel because the first one was surprisingly well received. And I imagine this sequel will probably be surprisingly well received too. Although it may very well be diminished returns and we may not see a Fuga 3, or we see a Fuga 3 and then that'll just be a trilogy of a weird game where you're driving giant tanks and controlling and talking to a bunch of cat characters, anthropomorphic cat characters. This is also very possibly a fairly easy style of game to make, so all they had to do is write a second story and make a little bit of changes and put out a sequel pretty quickly. At a certain level, it really is a fallacy that every sequel to a game needs to be drastically different than the predecessor. Like, more of the same probably would work on a near annual basis for a successful game. If Mass Effect 1 had not really bothered to make as many changes as it did to Mass Effect 2, and then Mass Effect 2 had just rushed out Mass Effect 3, and then they had rushed out Mass Effect 4, instead of locking themselves into the idea of a trilogy concept, they could have gone more in the Assassin's Creed vein, which in all fairness, while there have been as many bad Assassin's Creed games as good ones, at least Assassin's Creed as a series is still going on. Moving on, Clash Artifacts of Chaos has a night gameplay trailer, if you want to check that out. Apparently it's an action game. I'm gonna just leave it at that. Want to really rush here. The Famitsu sales have been updated. Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe opened at 189,031 retail copies sold, putting it in the first spot. Noticeably, then Octopath Traveler 2, then the PS4 version, then PS5 version of Like a Dragon Ishin, Pokemon Scarlet being number 5 as an old game, and Hogwarts Legacy is a technically old game, but only by a couple of weeks. Then Octopath Traveler for PS5 is taking the 8th spot. Ark Survival Evolved for Switch as a new version taking the 9th spot. And then Octopath Traveler 2 for the PS4 taking the 11th spot. So the Switch version severely outsold it, the PlayStation 4 version and the PlayStation 5 version. Digimon World The Next Order taking the 13th spot. Arguably too busy of a week for selling video games in Japan, as there's a lot of competition. It's a little surprising that the PlayStation VR 2 Horizon Call of the Mountain even sold this high. If anything, that gives a shocking thought to high numbers of units being sold for the PlayStation VR 2 in Japan, which noticeably is not being listed here under hardware sales. So they've decided to not mention that. PlayStation 5 outselling the Switch OLED models, and really just catching up, I imagine. Overall, still seeing somewhat good numbers for the Xbox Series X, better than they have in the past at least. Overall lifetime numbers drastically different for different types of units. It's almost like now is the point in which the PlayStation 5 is actually being launched and released in Japan, because it's been so incredibly hard to get the PS5 up until this point. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass Wave 4 launches March 9th. I think we had already talked about that. Dead Island 2 and its 14 minutes of gameplay, we had talked about that. Resident Evil 4 Remake hands-on preview, gameplay, and screenshots. So here's the Jack Krauser fight, which definitely seems like it is taking place in a very different type of room instead of an empty square metal arena that you fight him for. This is, I assume, the remake's take on the first encounter where you do the quick time events and are and get the knife from him. They may very well have just opted to not have two fights with the same character, and or put that fight back to back, put the two fights back to back. Noticeably, these are not quick time events as much. This is, but up until that point we were really doing a knife on knife battle, and I have to assume that the game forces you into a knife on knife battle in that section. Lakeshore exploration scene. A lake shore. I don't know if was that the name of the lake? Did it have a name? So this is like right before you get to the lake area. If anything, this really does just feel like this is basically the same game as Resident Evil 4, that they are beat for beat pretty much copying the general concept of an area and just adding more detail and adding a few more curves and a few less right angles. This definitely looks like the Ganados of the past, and doing basically the same concept. If anything, with the camera zoomed in more and them being bigger, it seems like you have a higher chance of getting headshots, although maybe they'll make it more difficult where you have to actually hit one of the eyeballs and you can't just in general shoot the mass at the top of the head. Let's see. Yeah. Really isn't showing you too much. There's going to be like new QuickTime, new improvements as far as selecting weapons, and same menus and same types of rewards. It's everything you would expect. Same kind of carrying inventory case. And then here's Ashley's sequence, which her sequences in particular are going to be the parts that are potentially going to be more frustrating or less frustrating, just depending on how it's built. if it's polished and she hides and you don't accidentally shoot her as much as you might have in the previous version of Resident Evil 4, that's great. This is a different area. I don't recognize this. And that's definitely a different attack animation. Salazar. So this is probably that big hallway being rethought. If anything, the remake here may make this less of a video game feel in a lot of areas, and the rooms might make more logical sense in the sense that they'll just they'll be smaller and more manageable. There's a lot of fog on the floor. And destroying candles. Yeah. It definitely am in a weird position here where I'm seeing a just whole new visuals on the old concepts, and I'm just not really that impressed because it's just been done before in the original Resident Evil 4 and its multiple re-releases and updates and the fan-made HD mod. Yeah. I'm not seeing anything that is concerning here, per se. You can see the remake visuals of Salazar versus the childlike appearance of Salazar. It's more feminine and grotesque of Salazar here. Which is whatever. Things feel different visually. If you told me that this was an alternate reality, different universe of where the events of Resident Evil happened, but things were slightly different, and both stories still occurred, I would believe that as an idea. It does bring about an interesting question, certainly, as to just, does this really benefit the series enough to justify remaking the game? Like, the game may just play a lot smoother too, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are just mods that make the characters look more like the way they originally looked, but is it that incredibly important and necessary to remake Resident Evil 4 yet again, so then you can potentially remake Resident Evil 5, so you could potentially remake Resident Evil 6, so then you have everything except for Resident Evil 1 in its own timeline and looking like modern games, so you could then try and sell all of those games for the next 20 years? I mean, that is probably their long-term plan, is that they just needed all the Resident Evil games to look similar to each other so that they could continue selling them. And with their ability to do that with Resident Evil 4, they you have to admit they succeeded. But yeah, I feel like you're going to get a lot of people that review the new Resident Evil 4 remake and say it just doesn't feel like Resident Evil 4. It's just going to... It's not the fan-made HD texture remod that just changes the visuals a little bit. It's a drastic different animation style with drastically different locations that feel similar to the original locations, but in a lot of ways, either the original game or the sequel is going to feel like a fever dream of the other. Moving on, Dokapon Kingdom Connect opening movie is available if you want to check that out. It's a turn-based RPG, JRPG. Ages of Wonders 4 expansions and premium content has been announced. That's for the PC, PS5, and Xbox Series. Game Boy Advance Nintendo Switch Online adds Metroid Fusion on March 8th. At some point I am going to have to probably get the online service and play some of these online games, because I don't think I've ever played Metroid Fusion. But also I would have to have the extra time to do that. I still haven't even opened Metroid Dread at this point, and that I got that for Christmas, so yeah, there's a point there certainly to not go crazy buying Nintendo Switch games when you barely have time to play Switch games. We already talked about the Capcom Spotlight, talking about Resident Evil 4 Remake, Exoprimal, Monster Hunter Rise, and more. 26-minute broadcast. I wouldn't be surprised if most of it is pushing Monster Hunter Rise and Exoprimal, and very little actually shows off Resident Evil 4 Remake, even though Resident Evil 4 Remake is probably somewhat close to being released. And then Square Enix's Yosuke Matsuda to be replaced by Takashi Kiryu. Change should be officially finalized in June, pending board approval. It doesn't seem to me like he's staying even within the company or on the board. Here you can see Takashi Kiryu is a younger looking guy than this guy by a little bit, but Asians really can be fairly good looking and well into their 70s and 80s. And so this guy could be, let's see, he's 48 years old, which is actually fairly young to take over. Let's see, what else has he been doing? He started as a general manager of corporate planning division, then he became chief strategy officer and executive officer, then executive officer of Square Enix Co. Limited as an incumbent, so I assume that means Square Enix Holdings Co. And Square Enix has a bunch of weird names that just confuses it. It's subdivisions and subcommittees and sub-businesses. Chairman of the board of Square Enix China Co. Limited. Then he became the director of Square Enix Co. Limited as incumbent. And now he is the director of Square Enix Holdings Co. Limited, incumbent. So he's been promoted multiple times by just sticking around, and people above him being like leaving. The Nier Automata boss fight joke was the old boss, Yosuke Matsuda. So yeah, this easily could be more of the same, though. For Square Enix, it may just be a culture of laying off people and blaming people, and there doesn't really seem like, top to bottom of Square Enix, that there's really any kind of management culture that would encourage longevity or confidence in people, or hiring skilled, talented people. It just doesn't seem like that's the case. Alright, one sec here. Got something in my eye. There we go. Alright, so now we need to go through the games on Steam quickly, if we can. Intro Poly doesn't look like anything. The Meme Hunter doesn't look like anything. Hot Head. Hot Heat Reset Chapter 1. Maze Action Game. I'm gonna give this a chance. Change to time. Like, do I really want to promote games like this? This, just as an experiment, I'll make a YouTube short around that. I'm still potentially trying to learn what looks like it might be good. Evolution Tale doesn't look like it's an interesting enough game. Escape First Alchemist. Just quickly say yes to everything. Now today is Friday, so at some point we probably would run into some adult games. We're still wondering, as it were, I'm gonna say no to this, if maybe we're not going to see any more of the anime style adult games because they're waiting up for the Tokyo Game Show. Think we'll say no to this too. Elfheim is an adult game. Elfheim Chapter 1. Okay. And seems like you've got flat 2D, I would say anime fantasy feel to it, although I'm not sure this really is being done by a actual Japanese team. $4.99 English language only is an adult game. Is it a visual novel? Yes. It has something certainly nice as far as bright colorful backgrounds, bright colorful single solid coloration on the characters. Seems to me like everybody's into the adult stuff. Seems like it's almost a pure vanilla type story. So there's something there to that. So colorful palette to the games, adult games. We have seen one that supports an Asian language and potentially is made by an Asian country. We haven't seen so far, but we very possibly will see. I think I'll say no to this. Smile Alchemist. Looks like it's a mobile phone port. Again, I'll give it a YouTube short. I'm putting a lot of these in the fall list when they probably don't need to. Oscar Wilde card. At a certain level, it kind of does feel like this is an adult game, isn't it? Yep. New Earth Saga of the New Gods. It does kind of seem to me like the idea is I don't even know what I was going to say. I've lost my train of thought. This game is the 3D pre-rendered, probably CGI type of adult games. Although, weirdly, I am seeing a lot of characters in weird positions and poses, non-sexual weird positions and poses. Just their necks are bent weird. They're in different poses. There's like one character that's dressed as a witch for seemingly no reason. Weirdly, there seems to be no actual nudity being shown here. So I don't even know if there really is mature content here, or if this is just pretending like it has mature content. It claims to be English full audio. Yeah, it says it has adult content in it, but it has weirdly gone in the direction I really would have preferred all games to go as far as adult content, in which it's not showing anything, but it's going in such a weird direction in that way that it feels like there should be somebody who's topless here with a black bar over it. That's ideally what those screenshots should be in my mind, is that if it's an adult game, it should show that there actually is adult content, but not show the adult content and spoil it. And here's what I mean by weird poses. It's just like all over the place as far as weird poses. And here you have like a weird crooked neck here. And you've got this character in like a witch or witch hunter outfit and weird long neck, weird twisted neck. It definitely seems like it's just all over the place. Got a bunch of people collapsed weirdly. This has to almost certainly be extremely low effort content compared to even the scale of these adult games, which were already extremely low effort content because they're just going and buying textures for 3D models in the Unity Asset Store and then making these low effort visual novels. We have a time management game. I'll make it short on it, but I'm not going to give it a follow. Yeah. I don't think I can hold myself to the standard that anything I make it short on should be on the visual novel. I think that's ridiculous to take that step. But almost certainly there have been cases where I put things in the fault list just because it's in the visual novel. Here we have another adult game. Looks to me like this is probably an RPG Maker game with basically low effort marker type drawings. It's flat 2D and kind of in the colorful art style, but really more in a comic book art style than anything else. Apparently there's a vampire lady. In all fairness, I think it is worth mentioning that it is kind of a shame that this kind of art style and comic book adults art style, the heavy metal art style, back when they were making animated adult content in very small amounts and the internet didn't exist. And so you're thinking things like heavy metal and some of the more lewd comics not from Marvel and DC. It's a shame that none of that art style has ever been like reverently brought to video games. Like, arguably maybe those art styles aren't very popular, or they were done by a very small amount of people in the first place. You may very well be talking about, I may very well be talking about 5 to 6 animators in total with a specific art style like that. And none of them probably work in video games or know anything about video games, and that's why it's never come over. Um, but yeah, if you told me that there was a non-adult game that looked like Heavy Metal the movie, or if you told me that there was a adult game that looked like Heavy Metal the movie, that would be intriguing. Is this game intriguing as a shoot 'em up, a beginner-friendly bullet hell game? I do like the idea of them doing something with the sides more. I'll give it a chance. Alright, next we have a game called Hentai Sera, Sera. It's just a slide puzzle, and oddly, it is multiple anime girls in schoolgirl outfits being shown in states of undress and sexual poses, instead of one character just named Sarah. Now, what's funny here is this is exactly what Steam has said in the past that they did not want on their platform, is that they didn't want the sailor outfits. Here, we'll just show it briefly here. They didn't want these sailor outfits with the white shirts and the skirts and the either ties or scarves like this. Now, and yet this is on Steam in the adult section just fine. Now, in fairness, this game is not depicting any characters in a particularly young fashion. All the characters have fairly large, if not gigantically large breasts, and fairly large, if not gigantically large butts. So it's not the particularly moe short style. This is more in the kawaii art style, the cutesy anime art style. And none of them look like they're anywhere close to being underage. Although underage by which I mean closer to being 10 or 11 or 12 versus being 17, 18, or 19. Prepubescent, I guess, is the right word to use there. Which arguably, if they had straight up said we don't want prepubescent looking characters, that would have made more sense. So no characters that don't have fairly large breasts and secondary like sexual characteristics that are developed there. That would have at least been a better way to say it. Noticeably though, this game claims to have full audio languages for every language in the game, all 103 languages on Steam, and above the fold, Japanese is not listed as one of the languages. So this feels like this is a game that either licensed or stole anime pictures and made a slide puzzle around it. Which, yeah, that's believable. But it also just throws all consistency out the window. If maybe things have changed. Maybe that one person that was working in Valve wasn't in charge that day or isn't in charge anymore, and so now the ridiculous no schoolgirl outfits that was never consistently enforced is now even less consistently being enforced, because certainly you would think if it was enforced at all, it would be enforced in an adult game. Wulong Fallen Dynasty, mostly negative, 32%. There's a crossover event also happening with Wulong Fallen Dynasty, with a different game. What was the other game that they were doing a crossover event with? Not Neo, I don't think, but maybe it was Neo. notice how the list here, maybe it was Remnant from the Ashes. No, it wasn't Remnant from the Ashes. Notice how the list here, when you have a AAA game from a major publisher like Koei Tecmo, gets very different compared to just being a regular being a regular publisher. You don't get that same kind of comparisons. Well, it would be interesting to see if somehow they fix the problems here, but I think maybe people were expecting a much better game and didn't get it, or they were expecting it to be like Neo and it doesn't play anything like Neo. Let's see. Blimey, where's the optimization? Tons of people can't even launch the game. It's like serving a plate of raw meat to the customers, undercooked. Optimization for PC is needed. Current performance is too poor. Alright. So this is seemingly an example of the Wulong Fallen Dynasty game in Koei Tecmo, a Japanese company, just not bothering to optimize for PC and instead focusing on, I assume, the PlayStation 5, which will be intriguing to see what the reviews are for like the PlayStation 5. Trauma Broken Paradise. Is this an adult game? Game has 7 endings and 11 outfits you unlock by finishing it. This is not a jump scare horror game. Yeah. English, Portuguese, Brazil. I'm going to give this one a chance, but I really am bending over backwards to give it a chance. Really shouldn't, should I? Looking at these outfits, kind of ridiculous, and looking at the other screenshots. Seems like there may have been an idea here of making something like Fatal Frame and just not the ability to actually make a good game. Is this an adult game? English only. Again, this is like the 3rd or 4th game that has looked like an anime game and isn't supporting any Asian languages. Bella Automata looks like a visual novel, and here you have a very short looking character. Yeah, that's probably too short of a character. With all the marks on their face, I wonder if these are all robots. It's interesting looking characters, certainly, but that's about all I could say for it. And again, you have a wide variety of hairstyles and skin tones to address the idea that video games in general don't have enough diversity in hairstyles, black hair in particular. Doesn't really seem like that is the case. Yeah, that animator really threw a landmine and then jumped on it himself by making that accusation. Although, in all fairness, his accusation may specifically have been to that one specific business, which at a certain point, that's just a disgruntled employee complaining about his specific business. Alright, this next game is an adult game, Desktop Garage Kit. So these are little desktop anime 3D model girls. Well, this further confuses the situation, seemingly, because I think this is mostly YouTube family friendly to show. Like, it's anime 3D models dancing around in bikini style underwear, bra and panties. It's English full audio again, and then these 3D models look even younger than the previous game. I guess technically they're not in schoolgirl outfits in this one, but that's about all I could say. Seems like they also show up on soda cans, which seems to not really make that much sense. Yeah. If anything, I imagine this is supposed to just be your background. They should have just designed a simplistic black background to show off what the actual app does. It's just a desktop character. So many screenshots blurrier than the others. So yeah, I have to really just throw up my hands and say I don't even know anymore. What are the rules? Does Valve know what the rules are, or has Valve changed the rules? This looks like an interesting potential kids game, which I do like the occasional kids game. It is a prologue though, so it really shouldn't be on the follow list. I'll make a YouTube short around it. You know what, I'm gonna put it on the follow list anyways, just to make an exception. But yeah, I don't even know what the rules are anymore, if there are rules. Which I'm fine if they want to get rid of rules too. If they want the adult section to basically be a no holds bar, we'll allow anything and everything, that would be fine. It is important to mention that the US Supreme Court is listening to this Section 230 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Challenge, and it looks like they're going to uphold the current status quo. But if they didn't, then there potentially would be a major change as to how Steam was run, but it wouldn't be anywhere as major as how Google or YouTube was run. Would be really crazy if those kinds of changes happened. But if the status quo is maintained, that's not really the best reason for Valve to all of a sudden allow anything and everything on their adult on their storefront, but that's what they've been doing in the past, so if they were just consistent, nobody could really complain. Is this another adult game? Quite a few. This one has not safe for work content as a patch, which arguably I would prefer that overall. What kind of game is it? It says it's a puzzle game. Looks like there's some live 2D animation going on here, which is a lot more polish and a lot more action. It's hard to tell a lot of times whether that's what you get or whether you get just a static image when you're looking at screenshots with static images. Seems to be a collection of characters in different environments, and then looks like it's cut to rope. Which you don't see a lot of that, honestly. A lot of cut to rope clones. Surprisingly, once again, Japanese not in the top above the fold. It's like these all feel like these are anime-like style games not made by a Japanese animator. In this case, I can see from the animation style it probably wasn't a Japanese animator doing it. It is really a shame that people in the United States, Westerners in general, just don't have a visual culture of their own to lean heavier into. But in the end, anime has just become ubiquitous. And when you look at like the wide variety of animation styles in Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network shows, you can see there's really no consistency there. Usually, most of those shows on Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network look terrible. Like Orc Chambers DX. I'm gonna say no to that. Courier Chef Tycoon. Say no to that. Here we have another adult game. Tune in the show. I suppose these streams would get a lot shorter too if I went back to censoring this. So Tune Into the Show is a 3D model, CGI characters, multiple girls, multiple interactions. I assume it's a visual novel. Yes, it is. Looks fairly vanilla. I suppose I should point that out. Like, I'm not seeing any bondage or any, like, rope or unique costumes, fetish gear. Looks like it's pretty straightforward. It's being sold as early access, which is weird, for $9.95. It's also English only again. Yeah. Honestly, if you are making a visual novel adult game that's that is vanilla, it's probably not got a lot of sales points that it can lean on. This game looks like garbage. 50 Days to Survive might be something. I have to remind myself my standards don't have to be particularly high as far as YouTube Shorts either. I'm not trying to say any of these games are good or just that they look like they might be worth thinking about. This is an old game. Guardians to Infinity to Save Kennedy. I'm gonna put this on the fall list, but I'm not gonna make a YouTube short around it. Come on. Find a spot where I can middle click and not bring up the scroll wheel. Alright, so that was all the games that came out on Steam in the past couple days. So now we're at the GameDeveloper.com articles. God of War Ragnarok to be the most nominated title in BAFTA Game Award history, which the BAFTA Game Awards began in 2004. Wow, it's been 9 years. Well, if anything, that's a shame, because that means for almost the entirety of me running my channel, I have never paid any attention to the BAFTA Game Awards, and thus they've never really felt relevant to me. And I'm not sure they really feel relevant to me at this point either, but I should have been more aware of that. Certainly. There is definitely probably a level of just xenophobia, though, where if I was mostly over the last 9 years listening to Giant Bomb was very possibly not talking about the BAFTA Game Awards because it doesn't happen in the United States. And it might just be that simple. There's a report that the EU is going to approve the Activision Blizzard merger after Microsoft licensing blitz. Microsoft's willingness to offer licensing deals to rivals might have persuaded EU regulators to approve the Activision Blizzard merger. I really wish somebody would explain what happens or what part of the EU gives them any authority at all. What offices of Activision Blizzard are in the European Union? You know, come to think of it, I could probably just search that, couldn't I? Let's see if we can do this. Because this has been the thing nibbling at the back of my head, is where are these offices? Let's see. Activision Blizzard is a video game holding company based in Santa Monica, California. Let's see. It currently includes 5 business units: Activision Publishing, Blizzard, Major League Gaming, and Activision Blizzard Studios. Okay. So let's just go through each subsidiary here. Activision Publishing is in Santa Monica, California. Irvine, California. King. St. Julian's, Malta. That may be it. New York City. Beverly Hills, California. So, St. Julian's, Malta. Let's see if we can get a general idea of where Malta is. Malta is a country. It's right there. There we go. So, it's in the Mediterranean Sea between Italy and Libya. It must be part of the European Union. Yes, it is. So, the thing here, basically, seems to be that King's offices and perhaps King properties are in the European Union. There must be some more King officers or some small office in the UK that they would be involved. But the vast majority of everything as far as Activision Blizzard King is in California in the United States. So if the EU didn't approve the merger, then I imagine King Activision Blizzard would simply sell off King and spin it off to its own subsidiary, and then the merger would continue as planned, assuming that the United States approved everything else. It might start the whole process over again. It might cost too much money, and Microsoft may just say forget it. Microsoft may really want King as part of it, but that seems to be where their interest and their involvement is included. But it also certainly paints a picture as to why the EU might very well approve the Activision Blizzard merger, in the sense that they probably don't have that much teeth to it in the first place. If the EU didn't approve the merger and still Microsoft was able to force through a merger of some sort, there may not be that much teeth, or it may not be that easy for the EU to then immediately try to punish this new merged Microsoft in some other way. In particular, the European Union, for better or worse, whether you agree with it or not, has done a really good job about being obvious and interested in protecting European interests and European businesses. Has that led to better European situations for the workers? I don't know. Like, I would say ask a European. I think inherently the European Union has a difficult situation in which it's geopolitically in a bad spot, where it's having to deal with a lot of refugees and a lot of conflict and war, the invasion of Ukraine in particular, and has always just been in kind of that bad spot. So they can't 100% just focus on making a better situation for their workers. I think generally most European countries do have pretty good situations for their workers compared to the United States, where the workers are treated like trash and corporations are allowed to make as much money as possible for the rich oligarchs in the United States, but that money does not trickle down to any fictional middle class, or definitely not the lower class. Anyways, moving on. Capcom is going to end Resident Evil 7's cloud rental service in May. Players who have a voucher for renting Resident Evil 7's cloud version are advised to redeem it ASAP. Where were you even doing the cloud rental? On the Switch? Yeah, the Nintendo Switch version of the game. You have to either buy it wholesale to continue to play it. Which, it's crazy that you'd even have a rental service on a cloud game in the first place. That definitely feels like something that Nintendo and game developers shouldn't even bother with. The idea of renting a game because it's a cloud service. Because inherently, every game is a rental if it has any online components at all to it. Because at any point your licenses could be revoked on any game. Moving on, a Dead by Daylight film adaptation is in the work from Blumhouse and James Wan, or James Wan. So, I mean, basically that could be anything and everything as far as a movie goes, because there, to my knowledge, really isn't any story behind Dead by Daylight. Let's see, we already talked about Yuji Naka admitting to insider trading. Let's see, and then we already talked about Square Enix replacing the long-serving president. They're saying to maximize creativity. That's where I saw this headline. But there's actually no quote that I saw to use that phrase, maximize creativity. Yeah, there's a whole quote here, and the phrase maximize creativity is not in this. Here it is. Talk about quote mining. Under the rapid change of business environment surrounding the entertainment industry, the proposed change is intended to reshape the management with the goal of adopting ever-evolving technological innovations and maximizing on the creativity of the company's group in order to deliver even greater entertainment to its customers around the world. Just a ridiculous long run-on sentence there. Which I guess it's not a terribly inaccurate headline, but it's a pretty bad headline to take 4 sentences, 4 lines of one long run-on sentence and bring it down just to maximizing creativity. If anything, they're saying the goal is adapting ever evolving technological innovations, which is almost certainly NFTs. Let's see, Final Fantasy 15 and Marvel Avengers were games that came out during the old president's reign. He also sold off Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal, and he began exploring the world of blockchain games. Let's see. A U.S. representative could legislate to challenge game companies over online harassment. Congresswoman Lori Trahan doesn't think game companies have been transparent enough about how they tackle online extremism. This is almost certainly not going anywhere. As far as a political story, if anything, video game companies in general have been very, very loud spoken about how they've combated toxic player bases, as they call it, for a whole variety of reasons, let alone just extremism. There's also there's a proposed Florida bill where anybody talking about or reporting on the Florida, I think, governor they're proposing that they would have to register with the state. Basically, register yourself for further scrutiny, which that definitely would not be constitutional by any means, to say you have to name names or list yourself before you have the right to free speech and report on newsworthy topics such as a politician and what a politician is saying. DeSantis, the Florida governor, also made claims that he would directly be in control of the Disney creative teams and Disney creative content, because he took away the Disney World special district permissions, which, in fairness, Disney World shouldn't have been able to run its own government as a special district in Florida anyways, but the truth is, all the creative decisions are done in LA and Disneyland. Yeah. So, yeah, you're not going to start seeing Disney Plus content change because of DeSantis, at least. If you do see it change, it's going to be against him. Moving on, we've got some YouTube follow lists to clean up. Let's look at this. This doesn't look terrible as a VR game, but honestly at this point I have pulled the trigger and I'm willing to get rid of all VR games from the follow list. Cosmo Player 0 just came out, so I need some more time. No, it came out a year ago. I should have taken it off the follow list. This one's not relevant enough. Doesn't have enough reviews. This one is mixed reviewed. We're up to the C's now too, so noticeably here's an adult game that's mixed, so I'll get rid of that. It's a horizontal version of an act game. I don't know what they mean by that. %, positive. What's the adult content in here? General mature content, foul language, sexually suggestive content. So it doesn't even look like there's actually that much adult content in it. They're saying it's an incomplete game. And then I guess this DLC might be the adult content patch. Yeah, I'm a little surprised we're already at the C's as far as the fall list cleanup. Corpse Party Remake 2021. Put that on the wish list. Horror game, psychological horror game. This is a more 90s anime style, but here you have a horror game where all the victims are anime schoolgirls and school guys. The thing about Corpse Party in particular, though, is that I think Corpse Party is a side game from... Nope, I think there are other side games. Here's a great example of where Steam has kind of failed us too, is that they're including a English only PDF, like art book, and there's no real way when you launch the game to see that, or there's no way to see that content in your library per se. Like, Steam has just never really allowed for those kinds of extras to be presented in a good way. Soundtracks are the same thing. There's several games I have that have soundtracks that I am not even aware of, I'm sure. Corpse Keeper is still early access. It's mostly positive as far as a fighting game. Action strategy roguelike. Or roguelite. Not a fighting game. Corpse Factory. There's going to be multiple games with corpse in the name. Another very positive visual novel. In all fairness, I would say at least a third of all the good visual novels are psychological horror games of some sort, because you can tell those kinds of horror, psychological horror elements better as a visual novel and keep the player on track. Whereas if you gave the player more control to run away from a scary event, they're going to do that. There is a VR game that is going to use the eye tracking in the PlayStation VR 2 to adjust for the fact that if you try to run away or close your eyes, the monsters will jump to closer. This is an old DS game. Let's see, 93% positive. I'm going to put this on the wish list. It's barely got the 30 user reviews necessary to be relevant, but yeah. This is the kind of game, though, that would definitely need to be cheaper. Way cheaper than $20. Core Keeper. Endless cavern of creatures and relics for 1 to 8 players. Almost feels like it's an attempt at something like a Minecraft game. I'm glad we aren't seeing too many attempts at Minecraft clones anymore. I'm going to say no to this because obviously it's focused on multiplayer. Copy editor. Irregular expression. Puzzle game, which is mixed. I wonder if the regular expressions don't work, or if people just don't understand regular expressions. As someone who doesn't understand regular regex myself well enough, it lacks the teaching side of things, though. Example, fourth puzzle in is shown how to find white space characters and digits. To solve the puzzle, you would need to know about quantifiers and using pipes, so it escalates quickly and doesn't bridge the learning between. Because of this, I can't recommend this for anyone wanting to learn regex. If you know regex, though, it is fun and relaxing. badly structured regex tutorial with horrendous user experience and some rough narrative. Well, that's a shame, because that's exactly why this was on the fall list, is that I wanted to potentially learn regex and maybe show off what I already know about regex. If anything, I have a hate relationship with regex. It's nice when it's helpful on the rare occasions in which it is helpful, but it is too abstract and complicated in almost every time I've ever had to use it. And it's always a situation where I had to use it, not chose to use it, because it is always the way searches and replacements are programmed. Right, so that's the fall list cleanup. I guess I have some extra work to do, in that I need to look at that bundle, for that humble bundle, and consider if buying those games for $30 is going to work well with my library of games I already own. I had 52 new tweets on Twitter today. Apparently Meta has slashed the prices on the MetaQuest 2 and the MetaQuest Pro headsets, which let me see how cheap they are now. The MetaQuest 2 256GB headset will be priced at $430, and the Quest Pro at $1,000. Back in August of 2022, both versions of the Quest 2 went up in price by $100, which had the 256 at $499. I don't feel like that qualifies as slashing the price per se, though. They've lowered the prices, sure, but slashing implies a significant reduction in price. In the same way that if I got a paper cut, I wouldn't say I slashed my finger open, but if I took a sword to the chest, I would say I was slashed at that point. I know I started a little bit early today, but I really wasn't expecting that much. Cyan has a bunch of pieces of tape on their floor that they're showing off, and the tape is labeled with things that are references to Myst. So I have to assume that they are reshooting footage, live action footage, or 3D scanning, 3D modeling footage for some Myst remake. That would be my assumption, not a new Myst game. Although they could certainly do a new Myst game. If they wanted to, they could make a Myst 3 and just ignore the events of the original Myst 3. I guess I started so early that I even have like daily login and Duel Live quests. Which maybe that makes an argument that I should play some stuff off screen. I don't think I would do that today though. And yeah, probably a good point where I could do some more solo missions if I was going to do that, but I won't do that either. I am just scrolling down my Twitter feed to see if there's anything else that needs to be mentioned. Void Terrarium 2 is now out for the Switch and PS4. They're trying to promote Wulong Fallen Dynasty. Let's see. YouTube put out a letter of priorities for YouTube advertisers. And whatever they tell the advertisers is probably different than what they'll tell the content creators. But alright. Let's see. I'm going so quiet I can hear my ceiling fan rattling back and forth. Yeah, I'm scrolling through all of this, and yep. Even though I had 52 new tweets, literally none of it was worth talking about. But that is probably a statement that Twitter is perhaps getting back to some normalized pace of people tweeting on it, despite the fact that Elon Musk seems to be still doing some crazy things, firing people at a certain point. Though I don't know if he's fired so many people and Twitter has not burst into flames yet, so it feels like he probably fired the right people at that point. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised, even though like in the last round of firing people that there was like a DDoS attack on Twitter. I wouldn't be surprised if that's literally the employees DDoSing their former employee. Which, I mean, it's illegal and extremely dangerous to do that, but I would have to kind of applaud that. If you got laid off unfairly, or you felt you were laid off unfairly, you probably should sue people, but I wouldn't be upset with people being a little bit more spiteful to their crappy employees. Of course, that is very much the eat the rich mentality. That's not really legal because the rich make the laws, but whatever. Leave it at that. That's going to be it for this stream. I'm shocked at how long this went. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. I guess that's it for this podcast. That is, I guess, what we're calling this going forward. If you want a friend to follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.